Let's link up with Krista on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Who is Matthew Paetz? You know, it's interesting. This is, we may just go deep right off the bat here, because a huge thing that I've really been coming up against lately is the conversation of identity, right? And how, well, we'll get into my story a little bit, but I believe that our identities are perhaps one of the most addictive things to any of us, right? Like, we're addicted to the identities that we assumed, in early childhood. And oftentimes that's what is standing in the way between where we are and what we truly want, right? So who is Matthew Paetz? The very first thing that came up is a man who cares. And weirdness, that question's actually kind of making me well up a little bit. A man who cares. And then the second thing is someone who matters. I think that's a big part of like my story too, is feeling like I mattered, right? And so those are the first two things that come up.
Well, we're going to break those two down a little bit more. But before we do, go to coffee order in the morning. What do you like to sip on?
I'm basic. All right. So for the coffee lovers out there, you're probably going to be turned off pretty quickly, but I'm definitely a Starbucks guy.
Okay.
Starbucks Pike is my thing, which I believe is a medium roast. And when I first started drinking coffee, which was, I guess now a couple of years ago, it had to be candy. Like I had to fill it with all the milks and the sugars and all the things. I couldn't handle the coffee taste. But I feel like I've matured enough now to be able to drink my medium Pike Place with no added anything. So it's just coffee now.
Nice. Saves on the calories, right?
Yeah, something like that.
That's usually why most of us go that route. But okay, let's go back to what you just described. And I want to start with the piece about feeling like you matter, because I think that's a really good segue into how you've gotten to where you are today and what's happened over the course of the last several years in your life. I know that story, but the reason why I brought you on is to share that story with the rest of the FYX listeners. So let's jump right in. Tell me about you, if you want to weave your coaching into that to kind of show us how you got to finding your path and your purpose with your career, and something that I'm sure you're still unraveling on a daily basis. But give us a little bit of background.
So let me start by saying you don't get into psychology because you have your shit together, right? I think that's important to understand right off the bat. But with that, yes, my background is in psychology, with an emphasis on early childhood survival patterns and then root cause emotional trauma. And I discovered that path because of my own healing, my own journey, right? Which I'm still on. I believe healing is a lifestyle, not a destination. And, my story stems back from early childhood sexual abuse from an older male that lasted about 6 years. And, from that, I'll say that, as anyone that may have gone through that experience, like the thing that was interesting as I look back on it and understand it more now, and both in my own personal experience, but also from, a deeper psychological understanding, is I was someone who I felt privileged to be abused, quite frankly. Like I felt privileged for the circumstance because I was convinced that I was chosen. I was a special one, right? So it wasn't this violent scenario, but rather it was one of manipulation. And then to the point that I even, as much as I knew that it's not what I wanted or where I wanted to be, I protected it. Right. And then that protection grew into shame. that protection grew into fearing if my family ever found out, feeling if my friends ever found out, feeling if and I started building those layers upon one another as I got older. And over that process, basically what I had come to believe was that my self-worth on this planet, quite frankly, was to be a physical experience for other people. So my relationship to sex had become something for validation and significance, and just to feel like I had like value, purpose in this planet. And over the course of my life, that grew into um, my layers include everything from alcohol to cocaine abuse to becoming an escort for a while to a near suicide. And I don't use the word attempt because the way that I was the way I would have done it there would have been no walking away. And so without going too deep into that story right off the bat, I'm real fun at parties, by the way. Clearly small talk is my jam. My girlfriend all the time, like I'll be at a restaurant and go to the restroom and come back and like know two friends and one of them's crying and she's like, what the hell just happened?
Did you do?
I'm like, I just asked about their mom. But no, so I'm real fun at parties is my point. But the thing that really I came to understand is, how early childhood experiences shape our identities, right? And who we believe we are and what we believe we're worth and what we believe we're capable of. And, going back to the morning that I nearly made the ultimate decision, because I believe this part is pretty significant, because what I learned that morning, I was on a cocaine crash, and I had reached a point in my journey where I just couldn't believe where I had gotten to, right? Specifically with the drugs, specifically, with the shame of the escorting, the shame of sexuality, the shame of all of these things that I now, by the way, look back with gratitude and appreciation, right? So that's the evolution. But at that time, I was not in that place. And, the things that I learned that morning, there was two very specific lessons that I took away from that morning. And the first one was that I didn't want my life to end. I wanted my life as I knew it to end. And at the time, I didn't know another way. Right. But I also want to correct that statement because, over the past several years since that experience, I also realized something else was even deeper, which is I did know another way, but I was absolutely terrified of it. Right. Which leads me into the second thing that I learned, which was that if I was willing to go that far, right. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But if I was willing to go that far, then I no longer had the luxury of fear. And what I mean by that is I could no longer be more afraid of my death than I was my trauma. I could no longer be more afraid of, my insecurities than I was my own truth. I could no longer be more afraid of, my shame than I was putting my family through that morning. Right. Because when I say if I was willing to go that far, what I'm referring to specifically is so my partner Allison, truly love of my life. We were in a very toxic place at that time, and we were in an argument, and that sparked the spiral. So we were on FaceTime, and she literally, I had a loaded handgun. That's why I say, like, if I would have attempted, it wouldn't have been. There was no walking away. But I literally loaded the weapon on FaceTime. So she witnessed this whole experience. And then from there, eventually, I don't remember how we got to this point, but I was on the phone, a three-way call with my sister, my mother, and Allison. Again, all three of the most important people in my life, two of which, my mother and my sister, had no idea what was on the other side of that phone call. They thought their son or their brother was just calling. Little did they know that I was in a complete spiral and, on the verge of the ultimate decision. So when I say if I was willing to go that far, which I proven I was, right? I did it. Then I could no longer be more afraid of my pain than I was my healing. And it was that morning that that was my rock bottom, and obviously coming on that. And by the way, I'd already been, I wasn't coaching full time by any means, but I'd already been studying psychology for many years, had achieved certifications and deeper understandings and all of that. But, the story had just kind of, its shelf life came to pass.
What was the first step in getting out of that and being able to realize all of that? Because it certainly didn't happen overnight that you got to that
Mm,
place. And as you said, healing is a lifelong journey. It's not
mm.
something that just happens and then you're done with it and you don't have to continue to deal with it. So let's break that down in terms of like you reach such a low point. What do you do first?
So again, it's the theme was the first, but it took a long time to practice, right? And that was full transparency, honesty, truth. I think those are synonymous in many ways in this conversation. And what I meant by that is not just telling everyone my things, because the truth is a lot of people knew about my sexual abuse at that stage. Like I wasn't afraid. It wasn't a secret.
Okay.
People in my family knew. By that stage, my mother already knew. The many of my friends, like I would talk about it pretty openly, from a place of, perspective and understanding. And I knew kind of what I was struggling with. What I was hiding was all of the behaviors in which I was, choosing in order to cope. Right? Like people didn't know, even my friends, they knew of like the drug use and whatnot, but they didn't know how significant it was for me. They didn't know what I was doing when I was on drugs, which is a whole nother thing, right? Because when you're intoxicated or you're under the influence like that, the things that you become okay with, there aren't things you would typically choose, right? So coming out of those experiences, I was basically just like stacking one shameful experience on top of the next, on top of the next. And my strategy in life, my success strategy was simply to appear as if, right? That was like a professional appearing as if. And that was the point that morning where I could no longer carry the appearance, right? It had
The
gone too
weight of all of
far.
it.
Yeah, it had gone too far. It was too heavy, too significant, and I could no longer carry it on my own. And at the time, like I said, I didn't believe I knew another way, but quite frankly, I was just too afraid to face it head on. It felt too big. But the transparency was key. And I think something else, and this is a huge part of how I support my clients today, is this next piece, which is that morning, my family, so Allison and my mom and my sister, they arranged in the period of figuring out where I was, because there was another piece. Allison did not know where I was staying at the time, so she had to eventually find where I was, come get me, the whole nine. And there's more to that piece, but um during that time of them identifying where I was and coming and getting me and making sure I was safe, they had arranged for me to basically go to like the ER for mental health, right? So I was rushed in to see an acute trauma therapist that was qualified to support someone in that state.
Mhm.
And it was my first time. I had gone to therapy and that kind of thing. It was my first time walking into an office of someone that I was ready to be like, here it is. Like I walked in there like if I'm just coming off the the tail end of those decisions, and so walking into this office, it was like, what do I have to lose? I'm going to say everything. I'm going to prove to this person that I'm the piece of shit that I felt like I was. And to this day, like I wouldn't know this woman if she sat in my living room today. I have no idea what her name is. I don't know what she looks like. I don't remember any of that. But I'll never forget the very first thing that she said to me after I just gave her every, detail of my life. And her very first sentence was, no shit, you found cocaine. What were you supposed to do? This is going to bring me to tears. But what I took from that moment, mind you, I was in my early 30s at this point, right? Like I wasn't a kid. But what I took from that moment was um, grace,
Mhm.
right? Because when
Like
she
someone
said
was
that,
giving you permission.
yeah, and it wasn't permission to go do the drug,
Right.
right? It was
To
permission to
feel.
hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was. And so when she said, no shit, you found cocaine, what were you supposed to do? It just completely disrupted what I was anticipating, right? Because I was expecting the lecture, you're better than this, okay, we're going to get you on a 12-step program, all of that kind of stuff, which I actually never did, by the way. But, I was fully anticipating the therapy response. So when she gave me that candid reply, like I said, it gave me permission to feel in it, and I felt grace. And then with that grace, I was able to begin to experience forgiveness and forgiveness for myself, right? Because, and this is the piece that I think is extremely important when it comes to healing, when it comes to especially deeper shame, traumatic experiences, choices, again, that are deeply affecting us to this day. I think when we're able to look at our stories objectively and recognize that we are human beings simply doing what we feel we know how to do in that moment, given what we understand or given what we have access to, um, to cope, to survive. Everything is survival. So when she gave me that permission to forgive myself, like that was the point that everything began to really shift. And then from there on, and I say this now to many, especially if I'm speaking to an audience, which is, this is my story, but it's not about me, right? And it's because I don't share mine for those who it's going to shock. Right? I don't want to share my story for those that have no idea or is kind of taken aback by the details. I share my story for those who are still afraid to share theirs. And, a big part of, coming on these shows and speaking now to audiences is I believe my superpower, right, is full transparency. And not from the perspective of listen to me talk about me, but rather I'm willing to talk about every detail, not just the ones that I think you'll want to hear or they think that will make a difference, but like those details that, anyone that's going through it, only they recognize that only someone that has been there would be able to identify. Right. And that's true in all of our stories. It doesn't have to be a traumatic experience, right? It's true in weight loss. It's true in weight gain. It's true in, I speak to a lot of fitness professionals that, going through, struggles of competitions,
Mhm.
right? Like a lot of these things, like they're extremely like nuanced experiences that, yeah, you may, I don't know if people will be able to see this video, but like, I always talk about like knowledge versus understanding, right? Knowledge is information. Like I have knowledge. I could, get what someone's explaining to me, based on their experiences. But if I've never been through it personally, I won't be able to understand those like details that only if you've been, how that operates behind closed doors. Like I know how shame operates behind closed doors. I know how shame operates in the bathrooms at random bars with strangers. I know how shame operates in bedrooms. I know how shame operates in the breakdowns that no one knows about. Right. Like, so these are the things that I think for those that are seeking healing, it's like what that woman gave me that day was the gift of feeling seen and understood. Right. So if there's nothing that anyone takes of any conversation they ever hear me have or have with me, it's that, at least for a second, you may experience, someone for the first time that understands.
And what do you think, this whole idea of knowledge versus understanding is very
Mhm.
interesting to me because, like you said, it can show up in weight loss journeys, especially. And when you think about so many people who are fitness professionals, it's like half the reason why we get into it is because we had our own physical transformation. And like
Mhm.
we literally, that's like case in point, understanding. It's not just
Mhm.
knowing.
Mhm.
Um, but what about when you are on your healing journey and, let's use your own family and
Mhm.
partner as examples, right?
Mhm.
There was obviously a period, a very long one, where, and even today, you could say they don't fully understand. They obviously went through it with you, so
Mhm.
they know. But as someone who is in a place of really focusing on that healing journey, what can you do to help yourself work on those relationships with other people so that you accept that it's not their job to understand, but you still want to be able to feel supported by them?
Mhm. So I think this is extremely important for everyone, not just family. Um, it's extremely important in coaching relationships. Like
Mhm.
what I'm about to bring up is an awareness that really has helped me not just understand myself a little better, but be able to meet people where they are, even if I don't have the personal experience of what they may be going through.
Right.
And that's simply this. So, one, our nervous system is running the show, right? All of us. This is, I say it all the time, it's not your mindset that's holding you back, it's your biology, right? Because your biology is quite frankly hardwired to do one thing and one thing only, and that's keep you alive.
Fight
Your
or flight.
physical, yep, it's your physical survival. It does not give one damn about your dreams. It doesn't give one damn about the blue check mark or, whatever. I mean, name it, right? Whatever our goals are, it does not give a shit. Its only concern is to keep you alive in every given moment. Now, before we just dive into the fight, flight, freeze piece, um, the thing that I think is extremely important for everyone to understand, especially if you're engaging with a person who is being vulnerable, who is sharing maybe a story that you can't relate to. Maybe you're feeling it right now, listening to some of my stuff, right? Because first thing is first, which is what we often do when we can't connect, when we don't know how, right? Is we turn trauma into competition or we turn experience into competition. Doesn't even have to be traumatic, right? But and what I mean by that is there's it's like a coin, right? There's two sides to this. So one side is, and I'll just kind of use myself as an example, right? So you may be listening to my story and think, this guy doesn't know shit. He hasn't been through anything I've been through, right? And that may be true. I may not, right? But when doing that, you're discrediting my experience, right? Or in this case, the other person's experience. Or the other side of that coin is you may listen to someone's story and be thinking to yourself, like, who am I to feel the ways that I do? I've not been through anything this person has, right? And you discredit yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Both approaches are completely disempowering, right? They completely disconnect us from, the deeper opportunity. And what I think is extremely important to understand is that we as human beings, we're animals. And, specifically, we are emotional creatures with the ability to express logic. We are not logical creatures with the ability to express emotion, right? So emotions are running the show, right? In this context. And that's important to understand because, for instance, if I say the word, let me just ask you, like, Chris, do you understand how shame feels? Like, do you know what shame feels like?
I do, but not in the same context as how you felt it.
Right. But you understand shame,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do you understand embarrassment?
Yes,
Absolutely. Do you understand how it feels to feel guilty?
absolutely.
Absolutely. Right. I do as well. I know how it feels to carry shame. I know how it feels to be guilty. I know how it feels to be embarrassed. Yet we've not shared any experience right now. I have no context as to what you're thinking about when you
Right.
think about what embarrasses you, what makes you feel shame or guilt, right? So the important thing is to understand that context is irrelevant, right? Because it's the emotional experience that's exactly the same. Right? So I may listen to your story, right, and not be able to relate, male, female differences,
Mm-hmm.
life circumstances, whatever the case may be. I may not be able to fully relate or understand, right, that experience. But if you're sharing with me how that experience has made you feel, now I can relate to what you're saying, even if I don't have the context, right? Because I can meet you with shame. Not let me share mine. It's not a competition where it's like, oh, you're shame, let me share mine. No, but there's empathy, there's compassion there. I can meet you where you are and I understand how shame works, right? So it's not necessarily what decisions you're making because of your shame, but being able to connect the dots where it's like, okay, no shit, if she's feeling shame, that she would choose to do this, that, or the other, right? Because how we respond to our struggles may be different, right? And again, that comes down to environment, that comes down to personal narratives, beliefs, identity, etc. Right? Someone may go in full depressed state. Someone may look like the life of the party, right? But both of them are dealing with
The same emotion.
a deep shame, right? And they're trying to cope and avoid. So there's a lot of details that come into it. But in regards to really being able to look at others with some empathy, with some compassion, grace, forgiveness. Right? This is huge. If you're judging, there's no compassion there. There's no understanding. There's no curiosity. Right? Curiosity, I think, is one of the superpowers that we all possess if we choose to use it. Because if we become genuinely curious about someone's behavior, genuinely curious about why they're reacting the way they are, why they're doing what they're doing, right? You can't be angry while curious. Right? You can't be judgmental while curious, right? So if you're genuinely curious, the intention is, seek out the emotional, like, what are they feeling that's leading to this, right? And I think that really creates space for us to be able to, connect more than we, just disconnect.
No,
I always try to come up with clever things in the moment
like
when I realize I'm like,
no, it makes a lot of sense to me. No, I want to go back to what you just said about the judgment piece. Why do you think, I feel like we can put judgment in the category of a lot of those other emotions. It's not necessarily an emotion, but I think it's like a reaction to feeling a certain way. So why do you think that is something that is so common for people? Like, what do you think that's where that competition piece comes back in? Like, why do you think that can be the case when in any kind of relationship or capacity that's the first thing that comes up when someone is trying to just share how they're feeling?
It's safety. So every single human behavior that exists, it doesn't matter if it's extreme isolation or extreme violence and everything in between, such as judgment, right? It's all rooted in the exact same core need, right, which is safety. And when I say safety, I'm referring to our physical survival, right? Not our emotional comfort. So safety, when you look at it through that lens, judgment, it's the equivalent of like putting your hands up when a fight starts, right? You're able to like keep them back, right? Because if I judge you, because most times if you think about it, the things we judge, more often than not, right? And I'm being politically correct by saying more often than not. I would argue that if we went deep enough, it would be 100% of the time. Judgments stem from first a judgment of self, right? You're judging another for something that you probably have done or do in one way or another, right? So it's a projection more than you always hear like someone else's judgment is more of a reflection of them than it is what they're judging.
Yeah, I think I read something like that very similar yesterday somewhere.
Yeah, and it's true. And if you find yourself judging, it's not that you're a terrible person or that's not okay. It's understanding it, right? Again, meet it with curiosity. Why am I judging this person this way, right? And if you allow yourself to go down that path just far enough, you'll be able to quickly identify, oh, maybe there's a part to me or my story where I'm carrying shame or guilt or embarrassment that this person just mirrored back to me, right? They're doing something that I have once done, or they're doing something that I was once taught is not allowed. And the fact that they can do it and they do it so freely makes me judge them, because truth be told, I want to feel as free as they do. Right? So judgment is, it's an act of protection more than anything.
And let's go back into what we kind of walked away from it, but I think that this judgment piece is a good way to tie back in. Your nervous system and this fight or flight mode, and talk about that a little bit more from the science standpoint and understanding or helping us understand what are we supposed to do with that? Like knowing that our body is constantly trying to achieve this protection, this survival mode. How can we take that information and help ourselves heal, function, whatever
Mhm.
word you want to throw in there, just maybe help ourselves open-ended.
So one of the lines that really stick out for me, it comes from my mentor and coach, and he always says, "Your triggers are your teachers." Right? So your trigger is identifying something that perhaps could use some understanding, right? Use some nurturing, right? It's just like a physical pain, right? If you have a physical pain and you touch it, right? Like if you have an injury or a wound, right, and you touch it, your body's obviously going to respond,
Right.
right? So that's the equivalent, it's the emotional equivalent, right? So if you're triggered by something, that's the same as, having, a sunburn and someone, come up and slap you on the back, right? If that's ever happened to you. But that's the same. So when you're judging something or you're, we'll just keep using judging, right? Like if you're really, leading with some sort of, judgment around who someone is or what they should or shouldn't be doing, or why that they're not good enough or smart enough or pretty enough or rich enough or whatever, most likely that is touching that emotional sunburn, right? And your response is to project judgment, anger, frustration, annoyance onto this other person, because it's actually a mirror reflecting back to you a piece that you haven't made peace with, or been able to understand fully, therefore it still exists, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, it completely makes sense. And in taking that and kind of understanding, your philosophy and a lot of how what has happened to you has shaped your thinking today, your reflections, like what you've been able to learn from all these experiences, how does that then show up in your coaching? So maybe you want to start with what does coaching look like with you? Like if somebody's going to work with you one-on-one, tell us a little bit about what that experience may involve.
Tears, cursing, uh more tears, some laughter, and probably a lot more cursing. No, like, so to break down the process a little easier. So I really look at any, like, again, process working with someone, and this again is a lifestyle, not a destination, right? So
Mhm.
it's kind of like working out. Like once you learn how, like now it's about maintenance, right, and keeping
Right.
up with it. But how I approach every single client in the very beginning is there's three specific phases that we'll go through. So the first phase is what I identify as awareness, right? An awareness piece, this is where we're going to lay down some context, understanding your biology a little more, understanding that, again, it's your condition. You're not broken, you're conditioned, right? So understanding the stories and the narratives and the experiences that may have created these beliefs, may have created these patterns or cycles that you find are now holding you back from whatever it is that you want to experience, right? So awareness. One of my favorite questions during this phase is, what is your preferred method of sabotage? Right?
That's a really interesting question.
It's just weird enough to get past the analytical, and something comes up,
Yeah.
because sabotage is nothing more than protection. It's not weakness. It's not you're inferior. It's not you're incapable. Any behavior that you identify as sabotage is nothing more than recalibrating back into your comfort zone,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
sabotage is a one of the main things we'll look for in the beginning, and understanding what sabotage looks like for that person, because when that behavior arrives, which it's inevitable, that's the
Yep. It's
point, we
going
want
to
it to happen.
for
uh,
safety reasons.
right, so that will tell us, okay, this is now the edge of that, call it upper limit, or the edge of that comfort zone, where you begin to retract back or retreat back to what is most familiar,
Okay.
right? Because familiarity equals safety. Why? Because if it's familiar, it's predictable. If it's predictable, I can survive it. Right. So this is why we choose things that we are familiar with, even though we know they're not what's best. Right. Because in the short term, they're safer. So creating a lot of awareness and understanding, so that we begin looking at our experiences and our decisions with, again, that grace, that empathy, right? So that we can better understand them, which allows us to move into the next phase, which is what I call disruption. Now, disruption is, simply put, when we begin to disrupt those patterns, whatever you've shared that you want to, focus on, when we disrupt those patterns with intention and safety, The intention is where, you know, a lot of strategic exercises will come in, strategic conversations. You know, that support becomes more of, I say this all the time to my clients, like when we work together, you get a teammate, not a coach. Like we're in
Love
this
that.
together. You're
Yeah.
not just being told what to do, right? But rather let's grind. We're on the floor together with this, right? So especially during that disruption phase, because that's when, you know, all of the insecurities, all of the doubts, all of the patterns that we use to protect ourselves, be it substances, be it food, be it you know, excessive working out, be it you know, depression, be it whatever our strategies to cope are, you know, those things will arrive. And this is the part too where I say, you know, if you're a coach or a therapist or a counselor, a mentor, or anything where you're in a supportive relationship, you know, they really only hire you for one specific moment, right? And that moment is the point where they would normally quit if you were not there, right? Because the truth
Yeah,
is,
that's a good way of looking at it, summing up accountability, right?
we all get to that moment we would quit. That's easy.
Yeah.
We get there every day, all the time.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get there, right? I don't need you to help me get to that point where I would quit, right? But where I may need support is getting beyond it, right? What happens after we go through that season, right? And we get on the other side of that story, on the other side of that coping, on the other side of that, you know, discomfort, really, you know, that's where all the things that you deserve exist, right? So disruption is that phase where, you know, it really gets into the kind of the meat of it. And then the third phase is what I identify as breakthrough. And breakthrough is nothing more than having just enough experience with the new behavior that your nervous system begins to identify it as reliable and safe.
Okay.
Right. So choosing, you know, salad over cheeseburgers, right? If you've never done that before, right? If you grew up in an environment where that's looked down on for whatever reason, right? Then trust that choosing the salad at first is going to feel like a threat to your survival, because your pack, which you are hardwired to achieve their approval and acceptance for your survival, you know, to increase your chances of survival, excuse me, you know, any shift, any disruption to the status quo is going to feel like a threat to you at first.
That's always a big one that comes up with clients that I work with alcohol. And I always try to show them that it's very much tied to the environment and of wanting to fit in, because I then see it show up as an insecurity for people where they're saying to me like, well, then everyone starts asking me why I'm not drinking. And that's tied to that wanting to be a part of the group feeling.
So, absolutely. So interesting enough, excuse me, when others start giving you a hard time for being that person, right? Really what they're doing is protecting themselves. Because if we're hanging out in the same environment, especially if we're in the same friend group, same family, whatever it is, right? We come from the same place. And now you're deciding to no longer drink, right? It's not that I don't wish you to be healthier, make better decisions, whatever that looks like for you, right? Whatever your reason is for no longer drinking. But rather, if we're in the same environments and you're not drinking, what you're really doing is exposing me for my inability to not drink.
The projection piece.
100%, right? And I say inability, it's just the lack of practice, right? Because really what comes up again is insecurity, like you just mentioned, because now we're sitting there sober in a bar full of drunk people. Love that. Right? Or for many of us, you know, we carry, you know, insecurities, we carry self-doubt, we carry these limiting beliefs that, you know, the alcohol or the substances allows us to you know, just kind of drop for a little while. You know, we're not afraid to dance anymore. We're not afraid to talk to people. We're not, you know, afraid to you know, wear the clothes that we want to wear. We're not afraid to express ourselves a little more authentically, right? And that's the fine line in my experience with both alcohol and drugs, is that, you know, in that when you first start drinking, you start, you know, engaging in a substance, like there's that freedom. But the moment you've had a little too much, that's when all the insecurities get to come out, right? So you go through this freedom phase that we all are pursuing, and then we don't stop, you know, because we enjoy it, so we want to keep the party going. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in that overindulgence, belligerent, emotional, stage where we begin to do things and say things and act in ways that, we're not necessarily proud of. Right. But then how perfect is this cycle? How do you avoid that? Just drink again. Right. And that's the process. Exactly. So when you ask people to stop doing things like drinking, what you may be asking them to do is remove their most trusted coping strategy.
Sure.
Because if I don't drink, then I have to face it. And I don't want to do that. Right. So it's understanding, and again, it's not that, alcohol is the enemy here. The way that I like to look at these things is, what's your relationship to it?
Right.
And this could be insert anything, right? Sex, sugar, caffeine, like whatever our vices are, right? What's your relationship to it? What's the reason why you feel like you can't go without it?
And I think that's a really important perspective of like, thinking that you immediately have to jump to the realm of going without it, like, why are we setting up that hard rule? Like, can maybe we walk through this a little bit? Like, something I always try to tell people in general is like, move away from the alcohol example. Another one is like with tracking your food, instead of having this all or nothing mindset of, okay, well, I didn't track my food today, so then I totally failed. Well, like, let's just try to get you to track one meal and see if you can do that again and again and again, and kind of let's stair step the goals instead of try to run to get there and be that way overnight and then immediately think that if we didn't execute on that, then we failed. And I kind of want to use that as a jumping off point for what you were getting into about the breakthrough piece and what you shared about the salad versus the burger. In your coaching and working with your clients, how do you help them measure the success or being able to really identify if they got through the breakthrough piece, if they can consistently show, I don't know, let's make up random numbers, like maybe 10 times they're in that scenario and they pick the salad. What do we do with the 11th time when they don't?
Love this. So I think it's extremely important to move the goal line, right? So couple different things, but first let me ask you a question because I'd be curious, and I don't know if I asked you this before, but in your experience, what is a more powerful strategy of success? Is it appearing perfect or recovering quickly?
That's a hard one because I think from what I've initially, from let's say who I've worked to move away from, I would have said appearing perfect, but I think that's a safety thing. I think something that I'm now trying to teach other people, because what I've learned for myself is recovering quickly. And what does that actually mean? Like, how am I getting to that? To give it a more tangible example, I'll go back to the idea of tracking your food or just eating according to some sort of meal plan. It's the idea of, okay, maybe you didn't exactly have the perfect breakfast, but that doesn't mean you can't stay the course for lunch and dinner. Like the analogy of if you popped one tire, you're not going to go pop the other three. And that's something that I really try to instill in people, but I definitely wasn't always that way. And when I first started to work on my own nutrition journey and that transformation, I was 100% in the category of perfection. And then once other factors in my life didn't look the way I wanted them to look, the food tracking thing like completely fell out the window. And I was like, I can't do this. Can't.
So you're absolutely right.
It's taken me like 5 years to get there.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's taken me longer.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I think it's extremely important to move the goal line where it's not about being like failure does not exist in recovery.
Right.
It just doesn't. Right. Because anytime you quote unquote failed, just recover. And then you look at the experience, you're like, oh no, I didn't fail. Like that was just like, is a learning.
It's a label that we're putting on it.
You always hear like, there's failure is a lesson, right? Which is true. But if you're unwilling to come back, you may never learn the lesson. Right. So if you're unwilling to, step back up, on the, get back up on the bench or the bar, like you may never learn the lesson that failure, quote unquote, gave you, because you never came back, right? You never applied that information now to the next time, right? So moving the goal line, what I mean by that is it's no longer about how perfect can I be, how many W's can I string in a row. Yeah, it's motivating, it's inspiring, but the reality is how does someone respond when they get their first L? That determines everything, right? It's your relationship to recovery that dictates your transformation, not your relationship to perfection, right? Relationship to perfection is what's keeping you stuck, right? So again, focus on recovering more quickly. Let that be the new goal. Like for instance, even in my journey, right? I told you at the top of this thing, like I didn't do the 12-step or whatever. But anytime that I was, removing myself from those environments with, the people that I used to party with or, whatever, it was a journey. It wasn't like one day and I left that, therapist's office. I'm like, oh, I'm good. No, I did drugs again. Right. 100%. But I was more aware of what was happening now. I was more aware of the tools. And then it became like, okay, yeah, I was much more conscious of the way that it affected me, the ways that I felt about myself, physically, emotionally, etc. And eventually it just became recovering more quickly. All right. So I did that. Well, let me move through. If it's someone with drinking, just don't drink tonight. Great. And if you have a drink, and if you're like, well, I had one instead of the normal 4, great.
Huge.
Love it. Love it. Right. I celebrate everything. It's like, absolutely. Like, let's make it safe to come back to the conversation. You're not going to be ridiculed. You're not going to be judged. You're not going to be, beat up because you can do better. Right. This is also a thing that really pisses me off. And it happens a lot with coaching. And I think it's because there's a lot of coaching that a lot of coaching programs they don't go deep enough in their understanding, right? They think it's just high pressure, high intensity, more. That's how we're going to get through it. Just push. So often I hear like, when people use things like, you can be better, you can do more, right? You can be bigger than that. Stop playing small. I understand the intention, but really all we become in that case is yet another authority figure whose approval we cannot achieve. Right. Like I work with a lot of business coaches, right, and help them as they break through a lot of their, limiting beliefs and stuff as they scale, grow, launch, whatever their circumstances. Right. And I hear a lot of them talk about how they had coaches or currently working with coaches that it's like, oh, I hit a 10K month. And it's like, that's amazing. Now make 12. That's amazing. Now go for 15. Now it's amazing. Go for 20. You can get 100. And again, it's not that they're wrong. Someone can. But when you have a huge moment, right, something worthy of honor and acknowledgement and celebration, and it's met with, that's great, but now what? It's like,
makes people feel inadequate.
100%.
Like,
you're like,
that's like
right.
Their 10K wasn't worth anything. And it's like, well, what if that's even $1,000 more than what it was the month before? But that difference of that $1,000 afforded them to do something like they've really wanted to do for a long time.
When someone goes live for the first time, or if you've ever been someone, who's listening to this and you are launching a business online, and that day that you finally get up the courage to change your bio, like you feel like it's going to be broadcast all over the world and everyone's just going to like come out of the woodwork. It's terrifying.
It is.
Again, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. So to meet those moments with, great, now what? It's like, whoa, I'm sorry, Dad, who I can't get your approval because I'm never good enough. I can't score enough. I can't make enough money. I can't be the popular kid. Like that's really what comes up. So this is the part that I think is extremely important for people to know is like, when I talk to them, it's like identifying your definition of freedom, right? And then building a life that supports that definition versus building a life that appears impressive, right? Again, recovery versus perfection. And because there's nothing more fragile than perfection. Think about it. It only takes a small scuff to ruin it.
Very true.
Right? If you're a sneakerhead, you know this. Right?
One like little scuff on your shoe.
Don't accidentally kick that plate. Like your shoes are ruined. Right? Can't wear them again. Right? But again, that just shows the fragility of perfection. But recovery, it's I mean, it's resilient, right? Like it never goes away. You always have an opportunity to recover, right? And every recovery, you show up with more information, right? It doesn't matter if you fell off your tracking, great. Right now, when you get back on, you start tracking again, you're showing up now with more information.
Especially one thing that I really try to get people to do with what you just said about the additional information. Let's dive into why you deviated from what you had agreed would help you achieve the goal you're trying to get to currently. And then use that to help us figure out why it didn't work in that moment and what we can do. Like something I always say to people, because this comes up often, especially this time of year, people are traveling, it's the summertime. And if I'm getting a new client, they may say something like, well, I'm going to wait till next week or like 2 weeks from now when I get back from my vacation, because it doesn't feel like the right time to start this. I'm like, actually, it's the best time, because that's your real life. And that's going to happen next year. And it's going to happen in 2 months. And it's going to happen in 6. And I get that you don't have all the tools yet, that you're going to be a master at it, but there's so much we can learn in you doing it and it not being super accurate. Because something, and this is the perfectionist thing definitely showing up, a resistance that I get for people is a lot with the food tracking piece is the ask to weigh your food so that people understand portion sizes. And when it comes to having to estimate, it's like this total freak out of like, oh my God, well, like it's not going to be exactly right. Like, what do I do? How do I handle that? Perfect. Let's talk about it and come to me with that. Don't wait until a week later when you're like, oh, I went out to eat 3 times last week and I didn't know what to do. I could have helped you.
I love to look at it as practice over perfection. You're simply practicing weighing your food. That's it.
Yeah.
Right. Just the sheer practice. If all you did, you're just practicing working out.
Right.
If you've never weighed your food before in your life, which I'm one of those people, by the way.
It's okay. No judgment.
I told you at the top of this, like I'm showing up to my dietary struggles, right? As I, enter the next phase of, well, quite frankly, integrity, right? Because I can't be out here talking about transformation while being in complete resistance to a transformation. My body is asking me. No one around me is asking me. My body is like, yo, like it's time, right?
Yeah. But to the whole point, like what I would say to you is if you came to me and you were like, I've never weighed my food before, that sounds super intimidating. I'd be like, okay, let's start. Can you do it for 2 days? Let's just see what happens.
Yeah. It's curiosity. Curiosity gets past all of that resistance, right? And there's some other tools that you can use, but if you genuinely become curious, like, well, how am I going to feel if I do this? Right? The intimidation comes from, basically it's unknown territory, which is why it's so intimidating. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to kind of plant this seed. So going back to the nervous system, right? So we are hardwired to avoid 2 very specific things in order to increase our chances of physical survival in any given moment, right? The first thing is pain, right? Physical pain is pretty obvious. Something's causing you a great deal of physical pain. If you allow that thing to persist, it will eventually lead to harm or death, right? But then there's also emotional pain. Same. If you allow it to persist, it will eventually lead to harm or death. This often looks like depression, disease, or worst case scenario, suicide, right? So that's the first thing, pain. Second thing, which is more relevant to this conversation, is anything unknown. If you yourself have never experienced this thing, your nervous system identifies the unknown as a direct threat to your physical survival. It's not logical. Right? Again, your nervous system doesn't have consciousness, right? It's not sitting there thinking about why you feel this way. Thank God, because we wouldn't be here if that were the case, right? So it's identifying cues. That cue is, have we done this before? If we've never done this before, we can't predict it. If we cannot predict it, it could harm us, right? This is why making any change at first scares us to death. That resistance is the strongest at the very beginning, because again, your body, that's a sign that your nervous system is working brilliantly, by the way. It's not weakness.
Right. That's what we talked about before we started recording, with your body giving you cues. It's giving you information
100%.
from negative, what we are deeming as negative consequences, like bloat, indigestion issues, whatever, inflammation, etc.
Right. 100%. Right. And you making any change in your life, if you have never done it, at first, it's going to feel like a threat to your survival, right? And there's a lot of reasons for this. But it's important to understand that that resistance we feel is not a sign of weakness. It's not evidence that you're broken, right? It's quite the contrary. It's evidence that you're operating at a very high level, arguably use the word perfectly, right? Because it's a sign that your nervous system is, again, doing what it's designed to do, which is protect you. Now, what do we do with that? If we're hardwired to avoid these things, how do we move past it, right? Well, first thing is understand logically that making this choice is, in fact, not a threat to your survival. Choosing salad over a hamburger is not going to kill me. I'm not going to starve to death, right? And one of my favorite ways to do that, using that as an example, and I'm doing this in my own life literally right now, where I'm like, okay, my temptation is this, my craving is that. I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say not yet. And instead, I'm going to choose, for instance, the salad first. I'm going to order the salad and I'm going to eat the salad. And then after I've eaten the salad, I'll then decide if I still want to order the cheeseburger. Right? So I just move the decision a little further down and I start with the thing that I would be most proud of. Right? So starting with that thing, what you're doing is you're allowing your body to experience this, see it as like, okay, again, the salad, it's fulfilling. I actually enjoyed it, right? I feel better. It's weird, right? I didn't know you're supposed to feel like this after you eat. I thought you're supposed to sleep, right? Instead, now I'm like, oh, do I still want that cheeseburger? Most likely not, right? Or at least not nearly as bad as I did, right? And because I no longer have the same level of temptation, I now have the ability to say, you know what? I don't need that right now. I'm good. And then I carry on, right? So I love to replace the thing, not take the thing we want away, right? Again, you don't have to take beer away, wine away, choose something else. I'm literally doing this client last night where, instead I have them identify what they would do. I don't tell them. It's not mine to tell you. Yep. What is it that you feel you need or you would like? What decision would you be proud of? I don't give a shit what it is. Doesn't make a difference to me. My interest is the emotional experience. Are you proud of this decision? Great. Go nuts. Right. So her choice was kombucha. She's like, I hate kombucha, but for whatever reason, that's what came up. Like, sounds like we're getting kombucha today. Like, good. Now we get to be curious. Find one you like. Go try some. Right? Choose it. Because here's the thing, and this is, if someone's still listening to this, this is a tool that if you do nothing, if you get nothing out of this conversation, my desire is that you would take this with you. So no matter what transformation we're discussing, I don't care if it's physical, emotional, I don't care if it's what job, it doesn't matter what it is, right? Any moment where we feel resistance, right? Or struggle or temptation, just any of those moments, right? If all you do is get in the habit of asking yourself this one question, which is, what decision will I be most proud of in the morning? Right? And I say in the morning intentionally. So again, what decision will I be most proud of in the morning? Right? Because truth be told, no matter what our stories are, and now having worked with hundreds and maybe if you count the crowds I've spoken to, I guess thousands, right? However we market our numbers, right? But in being in these conversations with many people and my own story, what I've come to realize that is true in every one of us, to my experience, every single one of us, is that we all simply want to become someone we are proud of. Right? You hear it all the time. I just want my dad to tell me he's proud. I just want my mom to tell me she's proud. Right? I just wanted my coach to tell me they were proud. Right? This word proud is significant and it's deep. So let's leverage that. What decision will I be most proud of in the morning? Why do I say in the morning? If you're someone that's ever made decisions in the evening and woken up feeling a little regretful about those, you know why I say the morning.
Yeah.
The morning has a way of revealing the truth. Okay? So in the morning, if we can look back at our previous evening, the day before, like I'm very proud of what I chose to eat yesterday. Very proud of that, right? Because I'm proud of that. I'm now sitting with that experience of feeling proud of myself. I kind of want more of that. I like it a lot better than waking up feeling like an asshole. Like, so how do I do it? I'm learning. Eat like I did yesterday. Feel pretty proud of myself. Right? Great. And if I happen to fall off track, great recovery. Right? Because again, the act of recovering is the opportunity to be proud of yourself. I fell off yesterday, but I got back on it today. I'm really proud of that. Right? So here's the thing, going back to the question you asked earlier. When coaching, what I focus on is not the circumstances. I focus on principles or the values. Right? For instance, being proud of yourself. That to me is a principle. Integrity, principle. Value, principle to me are kind of one and the same. They're interchangeable in this conversation. Right? I want to be someone of integrity. So when I ask my clients at the very beginning, my number one question, who do you want to become? Right? And being able to identify that. And it's not, I want to become rich. I want to become, shredded. I want to become whatever. Right? But like, okay. So if someone says, I want to become healthy, amazing. Right? What principles will it require for you to become healthy? Courage, guaranteed. Integrity, right? Being honest with yourself, truthful with yourself. These are all principles. So in doing that, you become someone you're proud of. Again, I don't care what the context is. This is why we can have conversations about anything, whether you want to lose weight, you're getting off substances, you're overcoming shame, whatever the case is, it doesn't matter, because life is a game of principles played out through our circumstances. Right? So if all you do is focus on making decisions that you're proud of, you may just fuck around and become someone you're proud of.
I love that. And I also love what you mentioned a few minutes ago in giving the example of like, oh, I just want my dad to be proud of me or whatever it is, and really shifting it to yourself versus the external. And using that as a way to take ownership of what you want to feel and having control over that, because you do.
Well, something else that's come up recently, and I've not shared this on any other platform, is again, going back to this word become. Right. So if we look at motivation or inspiration, what is it that motivates us? And we talk about goals, like have a goal, know your why. And it's extremely, inspirational. It's motivational. It's powerful. Right. But here's what I've come to understand. When our motivation is external, it's a goal, it's a destination of some sort. If that is the primary driver, and it's a powerful one, don't get me wrong, it wakes people up early, gets people in the gym, we make hard choices because we are motivated to achieve this goal. But what I'm finding is that more often than not, especially if you've had to really work for this goal, anything that's external, once achieved, it's often met with, well, now what? Right? There's this almost depression. There's this fall, like there's this loss of momentum once achieved, right? It's like, okay, now what?
And can sometimes also be the thing holding people back, because I often have conversations with people that when we break through, when I have clients who really need to focus on digging into more of the emotional and figuring out their values and why that's preventing them from executing on the tools, the habits, whatever you want to call them, I will go through that process of, who do you want to become? And then if you tell me you want to be healthy, well, what does healthy look like to you, right?
What does that mean?
Yeah. And sometimes we go down this path of them describing like what they want to look like, how they want to feel. And then I will then follow up with, okay, well, once we get there, what else kind of comes up for you? And once in a while, I'll have someone say to me, there's a little bit of fear that they're holding on to, because if they're looking for that external validation from a partner, from a family member, whoever, that once they do achieve that, there's no guarantee that the person is going to now be proud of them, now be happy for them, now have a better relationship with them. And that's 100% holding them back from going for it, because they're not so sure. And that's when I encourage them to look by themselves, because you're doing it for you, not for these other people.
Right. So in how the most powerful way I've ever found to make that shift for anybody, no matter, where you are in your journey. Again, so if you identify the goal, right, that's an external achievement, but once achieved, it's met with a now what, right? There's a depression almost that follows, right? But rather, let's shift it and say, who do you want to become, right? So when you understand who you want to become, right, we identify the principles, that brings you to the present moment at all times, right? To become someone you're proud of, for example, you can ask yourself that question when you sit down to eat your next meal today.
Mhm.
Which meal would I be most proud of, right? When you decide what outfit you're going to wear, well, which outfit would I be most proud of today, right? Do I go to the gym? Do I not? Which decision will I be most proud of? It brings you to it brings you to every decision, right? Which means it brings you to the present, right? And then by choosing the one you'd be most proud of, again, you become someone that you're proud of, right? Now, here's the thing. Imagine what the person you would be proud of could achieve, right? It's not
it's really
not a
powerful.
choice. You don't have to give up achievement to become proud of yourself, but rather if you just, again, shift the goal line, making decisions that I'm proud of, or making decisions that are, courage, making decisions of integrity, whatever your thing is, right? And you let that be your guiding light, your guardrail, then you will achieve so much more than any goal will ever allow. Because again, if and when you achieve that goal, if that was the point, what momentum is lost, right? Versus always showing up as someone you're proud of, you'll not only achieve that thing, but great, I've achieved that thing. Now, what would I be most proud of doing next? Right? It becomes a principle, a foundation of being, of living, of becoming. So instead of what do you want to achieve, my question is always, who do you want to become?
I love it. Going to steal that one from you and make it more of a pillar of what I do rather than just a few people here and there. So thank you for that. And I know I have other coaches out here who listen to this that I'm sure would take so much value from that. Want to be respectful of your time. I'm sure we could go on, but I've gotten so much out of this conversation and I really appreciate you. Didn't share this with you, but I like to end my shows with a little lightning round.
Oh shit.
So it's fun stuff. I just
feels like a setup.
No, we got
good because that's what I do with the answers.
These are usually like, more lighthearted questions, but we dove right into the hard stuff that I don't know what's going to come up here. So we'll just roll with it. Ready? Okay. We have been talking a lot about food in your diet and you've been criticizing your diet a little bit. So I want to know, like, whether it's sweet, savory, like what's your
pizza
pleasure food? Pizza. All right. Do you have a specific kind of pizza? Like what kind of toppings?
Okay. So it varies, but if I were to choose, it's barbecue chicken.
Nice.
Right. But my favorite pizza in the entire world. So I grew up in Indiana.
Okay.
And there's a small chain there called Pizza King. It was in my hometown, right? Like I still remember the phone number, like put it that way. I don't even know my girlfriend. I don't even know my girlfriend's phone number or my mother's, but I remember Pizza King's. And my pizza there was barbecue sauce, pepperoni, and mushroom. Like if I had to choose a last meal, that would be it.
All right. If you could snap your fingers tomorrow and change something about your diet routine, like what would be the first thing that you want to become the habit in terms of you defining who you want to become in the context of your food choices? Let's say it that way.
So the very first thing that came up is a visual of greens.
Okay.
Right? Like juices, salads, whatever. And the reason why is, when I think about who I'm becoming, right, this stage of my transformation, the way that I like to describe it is someone who eats like an adult, right? Because I told you in the beginning, like I used to have the diet of a teenager, right? And my thing is salt, not really sugar. I couldn't care less about sugar, but like you give me a bag of chips, it's a wrap. I'll find the bottom. But it's eating like an adult, eating with intention.
I like that. What is your favorite book? I don't know if you're a reader, more of like an Audible kind of guy. Is there one that stands out?
Holy shit, there's several. I'm surrounded by them. I don't know what to do with myself. I'll just go with the very first one that came up.
Perfect.
And it's this one. It's called Claim Your Power by Mastin Kipp. So Mastin's work, if you're not familiar, is my North Star. Like so much of his story is parallel, so much of just what he goes into. And the thing I love too is, is in our line of work, there's a lot of imposter syndrome when we first get started, right? Well,
sure.
always,
Always,
in
yeah.
many cases. And the thing I love about his story is he is, I mean, insanely well researched and educated. But he for a long time, I think he used to call himself, the letters after his name was a CDO, right? And it's a college dropout. And his whole thing, like, he's disrupting the traditional psychology communities with his work, and he's doing it as an unlicensed professional, but he's extremely well trained. So I see a lot of his story. I kind of see him as like my Michael Jordan as a basketball fan. So his book, Claim Your Power, is what came out first.
Cool. Last but not least, super easy one. Promote yourself for us if we want to stay connected with you, Matthew. What's your shameless plug?
This is supposed to be the easy part.
The easy
promoting
one.
yourself.
Yeah. Promote yourself. Come on. First tell us, like, I know you mentioned a couple times you were like, if you only take away one thing from this, I know you kind of threw in like at least 2 or 3 if I was counting them all. But as like a parting message, what's the shameless plug? Like that if you could just leave people with one more thing, and then tell us where we can connect with you on social media, etc.
Cool. So I'll start with something I teach now called the purpose formula. So what we didn't get into today is this conversation around purpose, right? It's something that we all are innately yearning and create. And I believe a purpose is something that we create, not find, right? So how do we create more purpose? It's simply this. It's pain plus passion times safety equals purpose. And to make that make more sense quickly, pain is the opportunity to, or the ability to extract the wisdom from your deepest struggles, right? Purpose is not found inside of your passions. It's found inside of your pain, right? Because at the root of purpose is to be of value to others, to have value greater than self. What greater value do you have to offer the world than an understanding of how to overcome or navigate some significant struggle, some significant, limiting belief or circumstance, right? So being able to extract the wisdom from your pain plus passion. Passion is simply the shit you like to do, right? That's it. Things that you enjoy, right? But passion is the vehicle in which you get to deliver that wisdom to the world. It's not the source. It's the vehicle, right? So our coaching, our platforms, it's a vehicle. It's not the source, right? So passion is simply the vehicle in which you get to deliver the wisdom from your pain to the world. Then times safety. Why times? Because there's no such thing as overdosing on safety, right? And safety is the one thing that we all need in order to do something we've never done, right? To be courageous. So safety in this is what I identify as qualified support, right? The support of someone who has gone before you, who understands what you are going through and what you're going to experience as you do the transformation, right? Such as how you are with your clients and your audience. It's why I share my story, right? So if you add this wisdom from your struggles plus the vehicle, which is your passion that you get to deliver that struggle or that value to the world, that wisdom to the world, time safety, qualified support, a mentor, a coach, someone that has your back, right? And then with those 3 things in place, you get to live from purpose.
Love it.
And then where you can find it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So in the show notes, I think wherever you put it. So one of the things I'm most proud of is I have a quiz that I invite everyone to take. And the quiz is simply to identify your path to purpose. Notice I said path. It doesn't identify your specific purpose, right? That's a little difficult to do in just a handful of questions. But it identifies your path to purpose. And the reason why I love this so much is it's something that, it's easy, it's enjoyable, it's personality driven, but it gives you some tangible detail at the end. And then if someone's interested in moving forward with that conversation, learning how to, be supported on a deeper level, be it group or one-on-one, that's the front door, right? Once you take the quiz, you'll have the opportunity to take that conversation wherever you feel is best for you.
Cool. Well, we'll definitely be sure to link that down in the show notes. And I didn't know
Awesome.
you had a quiz because that
Hey.
didn't come up the first time we talked. So something for me to do too. For
Awesome.
everybody who listened out there, thank you guys so much for tuning into today's episode of The Fix. We appreciate you guys as always. The best thing you can do is share this message. That's how we can help more people by being transparent, being authentic, showing up, and whatever you got out of it, let us know. Because I also think the other piece of this is that communication factor, right? And sometimes podcasting can feel a little lonely in that sense. Unless you're talking to somebody else, you're putting all this stuff out there, your imposter syndrome starts coming.
Oh
Are
yeah.
people liking this, right? So
Mhm.
So let us know, validate us a little bit, but also let us know what you got from this. I got so much from this. And, that's been such an important part of podcasting, just the opportunity to learn. Like, what can I take from this and now put back into my coaching, my personal relationships, professional. So Matthew, thank you for all of that. Definitely won't be the last time we chat.
Yeah.
And hope you guys who have listened in today have an awesome rest of your day.
Thank you very much.